how do we overcome imposter syndrome? So I think a lot of these women that I work with are very self-aware, know that they can improve their confidence and should be asking for those things. But it's really digging deep into what those internal thought patterns are, like you're saying, that are holding them back. So doing some of that inner work, kind of understanding it, and then there's evidence-based practices to actually change your thinking patterns, start taking those actions that over time improve your confidence and things like that. So I think when we talk too about what those barriers to advancement are, I do think that one of the big solutions needs to be helping and providing these resources to help women get to the root of what the challenges are, right? And then step into being that more confident and authentic leader.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when are you watching us. And thank you for being part of the Material Business Podcast. My name is Monica Hernandez, and I'm your host. And it's my privilege today to be with Megan. Megan, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Thrilled to be here and having this conversation with you today.
We are really thrilled because Megan and I are going to speak about something that we are both passionate about, and that is how we can empower women that are aspiring leaders, that are in the middle of their careers, continue in that progression. It seems that we have both seen and then experienced perhaps that glass ceiling that seems to be very apparent still today. And as you guys know, I am not only about, hey, we have this problem, but what is the solution? How things have been working. And then Megan is going to give us a lot of insights on how can we make this more manageable and then get us where we want to be, where we deserve to be, right? So, Megan, tell us, who are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with kind of my career and who I am title-wise, but I know you like to get into who the person is, so absolutely tying that in at the end. So I have worked in the electricity sector here in Alberta for over 15 years now. I'm currently leading an organization advocacy group that advocates on behalf of industrial power consumers and helping organizations and these businesses really navigate the increasingly complex market dynamics and regulatory environment that we're in. And even if you're not in the power space, you're seeing it, you're following along probably with some of the headlines the last year. It's a space that's increasingly politicized. We know that things are happening really quickly. So certainly never a dull moment in the industry as we tackle affordability and increasing challenges of reliability on the system and all of that as we move to a decarbonized economy. And then in addition to the work that I do in the power sector, I'm also an executive coach and founder of Repowered Leadership. So a few years back, I took an executive coaching certification really just to enhance my own leadership skills. I've always been really interested in leadership, like yourself, and organizational psychology, team dynamics, all of those things. So it was just of interest to me. I had never really had experience with executive coaching before this program, but when I went through it, it really opened up my eyes to the power of executive coaching. And I realized that this is exactly what I needed, right, as a woman leader in this male-dominated sector. And wasn't an executive at the time, right? So I think this is a resource that's often available to senior executives, but maybe not as much for these women that are trying to break through that glass ceiling, right? Like you talked about. So I founded Repowered Leadership at that time, really made it my mission to bring this level of support to more women, help them build up the confidence and influence and advancing and filling those seats at the table, and then just really feeling supported and equipped to succeed in those positions. So outside of my titles and the work that I do, I would say that I'm someone that really values growth and connection, and I really bring that into everything that I do. So I love strategic thinking. I love getting things done. And that's why I think I really thrive and love the strategic advocacy work that I do. But also in this world of entrepreneurship that I've embarked on. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur or aspired to be an entrepreneur, but here I am.
And you're doing it with such grace. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I certainly was one of those people that was stuck in the position, because you and I have spoken about this before, right? The way industry works is, oh, you're very good at technical, let's promote you to leadership with zero skills, and then all the people in your team are expecting you to be to that level where you haven't been able to build the tools to even help yourself, let alone to lead a team, right? So tell us a little bit about that. And perhaps because our audience is so wide, perhaps this terminology of glass ceiling is not known for a lot of them. So what is that glass ceiling?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few different kind of terms I think that are thrown out there when we're talking about gender diversity and leadership and all of those things. So there's the glass ceiling. So really the underrepresentation of women at the most senior levels of leadership. So it's about the barriers that women face to get into those positions. And we're still seeing that very prevalent, with only 10% of women in executive roles in Fortune 500 companies. And then there's another term, the broken rung. So you might be familiar with that one too, right? It's that jump into that first management position or leadership role. And the stats that are behind that showing that more men than women move into that role. So I think it's for every 100 men that get promoted into a manager role, only 81% of women are given that opportunity. So there's the glass ceiling and the broken rung. And then one that I think is not talked about as much is the leaky pipeline to senior leadership, right? So these are women that have already climbed the ladder. They've stepped over the broken rung, maybe not quite shattered that glass ceiling, but are in this high potential, high performing women in the pipeline to senior leadership. This is where most women are, and also the most women are leaving leadership in this stage of their careers. That's and actually the Prosperity Project had back in 2024 released a report that showed the pipeline to senior leadership has actually dropped by almost 11% in the last 2 years. So we are seeing, some progress with women advancing into executive roles. But when we're looking at this pipeline, we're not seeing that progress. We're actually seeing us going in the reverse.
The wrong direction. And what are some reasons why is that happening? Like, what is in your experience and you have in your practice, you have encountered many of them. Like, what are some of those reasons? Maybe perhaps you can name your top 3 choices on why is that.
Yeah, and encourage you again to read through some of the findings from the Prosperity Project report as well. In my experience and personal experience and the women that I work with, I think there's certainly in a male-dominated sector specifically, a lot of external barriers that we face in the workplace. Things like gender bias and microaggressions, and we know that these things are still happening today, certainly. I actually recently surveyed my community, and one of the biggest barriers, what they cited as the biggest barrier to advancement, is a lack of resources, support, and opportunities to taking that next step. So that was 85% of women that cited a lack of resources and support. And it's interesting, actually. There's another study, the Boston Consulting Group, so BCG, does a report, Untapped Reserves, and it's specific to the energy sector. And if you go through those findings, one piece that's particularly interesting is that the way that men perceive what those barriers are for women advancing in leadership are actually very different than what women perceive as the barriers. So men will say that it's a lack of qualified women, whereas women will cite it's the lack of support and opportunities. So there's certainly that, right? Some of these external barriers. And then it's also a lot of those internal barriers that all of us face, but women are, it's just a different environment. We've been conditioned differently from the get-go. And so some of the imposter syndrome is another one, right, that a lot of women cite as one of the barriers to really stepping into those leadership roles. So I have one woman that I was working with and chatting with had this great opportunity to step into being one of the executive leaders, but It's that a lack of confidence a lot of the time and a lack of really seeing themselves, I suppose, in those positions.
That's so interesting. I was talking with a previous guest, and she is not doing this only for women, but she is doing it for underrepresented groups in the construction industry. She's giving a lot of tools for them to complete their studies. One of the things she said to me in the podcast just struck my mind right now as I was hearing you say it. She said sometimes when people have been told all their lives that they can't, when you give them an opportunity, they're like, why, why are they giving it to me? Like, what? Like, do I deserve this? Do I really, like, are you serious? Like, is this a trap? Where is the catch?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps is that, right? Like, we have been, like you said it, we have been conditioned from the get-go with some biases in our heads and society and things like that. So sometimes it is, what is that next step look like? And why am I not taking it? It has a component from external position, but also from your inside. Like, what is it going through your head when you get that opportunity, when you get that call, when they give you that momentum? But also there is the condition of, how can I ask for that? How I know that I can. So how can I move forward with that plan and make it happen? And I think that's one of the biggest barriers to overcome when it comes from your internal positions. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up an important point, is that how do you do it
Mhm.
too, right? Because I was at a conference like last year, it was an energy conference, also talking on the topic of enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the sector. And there was one inspiring senior leader in the industry on one of the panels saying, what we have to do is just, be more confident, just get over imposter syndrome, I think was what I remember hearing. And that is, I agree. I also find it is almost unhelpful in one respect to not, without the tools, right? How do we overcome imposter syndrome? So I think a lot of these women that I work with are very self-aware, know that they can improve their confidence and should be asking for those things. But it's really digging deep into what those internal thought patterns are, like you're saying, that are holding them back. So doing some of that inner work, kind of understanding it, and then there's evidence-based practices to actually change your thinking patterns, start taking those actions that over time improve your confidence and things like that. So I think when we talk too about what those barriers to advancement are, I do think that one of the big solutions needs to be helping and providing these resources to help women get to the root of what the challenges are, right? And then step into being that more confident and authentic leader.
I love that piece. It's like, here is like the blueprint. Now, how is that work for you and how you can make it actionable? And then often, like, women are very determined. They'll go for it if they know what is that path look like. You've been in the industry for a long time. So, and I'm guessing you also have seen lots of that in your personal side. What was one of the things that helped you make that transition and say, okay, I know what I have, I know what I need to be doing, and I'll do it? What was that push point for you?
Yeah, for me, it was several years ago now, I guess. So there's been highs and lows throughout my career, as I'm sure many can resonate with. And there was a time where it was particularly challenging as more of a new leader at a new organization, and really feeling like I had to prove myself in the role, right? And there's, of course, a lot of expectations, a lot of work. Everybody is really busy with all of the challenges that we're actually working to solve in this industry right now. So no shortage of work, a lot of expectations put on myself by leaders, but also probably even more so put on by myself as a perfectionist, or recovering perfectionist. And I was in this position where trying to also keep everybody happy. So it's that people pleasing that was really coming up for me as well in my role. So feeling like I needed to do it all alone and keep everybody happy kind of at the same time, right? And feeling like I was really failing on all fronts. So it was a place where I was feeling a lot of stress, a lot of overwhelm, and really spending a lot of my time and energy just ruminating on things that were happening, on the situation that I was in. And then it was probably into the pandemic, also some maternity leaves that I had just prior to the pandemic that allowed me to step back and do a little bit more of that self-reflection, thinking about, okay, where is it that I want to go? What do I actually stand for? Getting clear on my values and my goals and all of these things. And then also doing some of that work. So I went through a program. It was a 6-week program, a positive intelligence program. So I'm not sure if you've heard of positive intelligence before. Maybe some of your listeners have, but really about, like you had mentioned before, it's those negative thought patterns that show up for all of us, or as he calls it, it's a book by Shazad Shamin and a program created by him. He calls them those saboteurs, right? So getting really aware of what those inner saboteurs were for me, how those were showing up. And again, not a surprise. It was the people pleasing and it was that overachievement, that kind of, trying to hit all the goals and then on to the next, and really feeling a lot of stress in all of that. So getting clear on that, reframing, and coming out the other side with a lot more mental clarity and focus on what I wanted, but also just focus on, dealing with the things that actually matter, not spending as much time ruminating and overthinking on things that maybe aren't in my control and things like that.
And that's such a great piece of advice. And I keep saying it. It's like sometimes we don't have, like, we have control in very little things. If you look at it in a huge scale, we cannot control who's governing this country, or who is, like, how many natural disasters we have a year, or how, like, you had, like, this morning I was talking to a mentee of mine, and we had all the intention to be there, but her dog kept on, like, bothering her to go out, and she's like, I have to go. I'm like, well, go, because, like, poor dog needs to go out, right? And then when we come back and we were talking about this, and I said, see, you don't even have control over your own dog that you think is your own, right? It's like you will have control in many things. So the one thing that you can control is you, and how you act against, or how you adapt your thinking on the situations that you put on. And then that whole shift just allows you to see things in a different way. So that is a really good piece of advice. Thank you. If you were talking with a leader right now, so let's say, what would you say to that leader that is in, a STEM industry, and perhaps they're just starting to navigate how they implement some of those changes in their organization? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say if they're trying to navigate or implement changes to their organization, I think what you were saying there too is navigate and implement changes even within your own self, or kind of how you're showing up. So maybe there's two different parts to the answer there. So when I think one of the pieces of advice, I guess, is around boundaries and setting healthy boundaries. And I know that we hear this all the time, right? Like, we need those boundaries, and it's so much easier said than done. So but I do think that earlier in my career, also different, past relationships, all of these things, boundaries were the answer. And so really learning the tools and skills to communicate your boundaries, get clear on what those boundaries need to be, whether it's physical, time boundaries, or just mental boundaries, to help you stay focused on what matters most. And how to communicate those clearly and effectively would be probably a great place to start. And that's for getting control of your own well-being and success, right? So when we talk about taking back control, and if you're trying to implement change within the organization, I would probably say, again, focus on kind of what you can control. I think there is a lot, and it's great. We need to bring awareness to a lot of the systemic changes that still need to happen in our industry, and really it's across industries when we're talking about women in leadership. I think that there's a lot of change that still needs to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. So really taking that step that you can take and find, and you don't have to do it all alone, right? There are supports in place, and it's so much easier and more fun when you have the people around you lifting you up or catching you when you fall as you're navigating your own leadership journey.
Absolutely. So you have touched in a subject that I am very much in love with, which is self-leading. You can't, like, a lot of people ask me, how can you make your team desire to be with you? Like, how can you want that person to come to work and not be like, oh my God, I hate my job so much. Another day, like I was once I was in a job site, and then every day I will go to the stop bus. They will drive us to the place, and everyone will be like, another day in paradise. And I was like, it's draining you. It drains your soul if you go to a place where you don't want to be. And the
Mhm.
statistics are astonished. It's like 80% of people don't want to be there. They don't want the job they have right now. They don't want the company they don't. And so to me is that, how can you make as a leader your people wanting to be there? How do you want to be there? Do you really want that? And I think that is one of the simplest, easiest questions, but I don't think we ask ourselves that enough times as leaders. So
Mm.
thank you for bringing it up. It's a huge piece. And then you touch base on well-being. So what are some of those pieces of advice maybe, or what has worked for you in that well-being and self-care, self-love that we talked a lot in this podcast about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what you're talking about right there ties a lot into well being, right? So if you're not taking that step back to ask yourself whether it is where you want to be or aligned with kind of your values or where you want to go, that misalignment can really take a toll, I think, on your well being at work. So taking that time to think about, all of those, doing that self reflection again. I mean, it's simple, but it takes time, and it's not something that we're all necessarily taught to do or think that is a productive use of our time, right? But it absolutely is if you're serious about improving your own well-being. I would say as well, the boundaries ties perfectly into well-being. I think if we're consumed by all the pressures, overloads of work, or just all these different competing priorities and just feeling stretched, we're not feeling like our well-being is at its best, but we're also not driving productivity for our teams. We're not thinking strategically. We're not being able to make that biggest impact, right, that we want to be able to make. So kind of end up stuck in survival mode, and it doesn't help you. It doesn't help kind of your organization or your team, right? It doesn't help your team want to show up feeling like they want to be there every day. So and as far as, I mean, self-compassion is a learned thing, but that's a huge part of it as well.
It is so much. And sometimes I was reading an article last week about we have that superwoman syndrome that we want to, like you were describing at the beginning, be the super mom and the super boss and the super leader, the super spouse and the super friend and the super daughter and the super everything. And then at some point, the super needs to cut a little bit of slack because it's just against our health.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is something that it is very difficult to come back to. Talking for, like, my personal experience is, once you get sick, coming back to what level of health you had before you were takes 2 times or 3 times longer than losing it. So definitely something that it is, and it's something that you have to learn along in the life, right? It's not something that they teach in kindergarten or
Mm-hmm.
elementary, university. There is really a lot of the components that you were speaking about is sit down with yourself. And I don't think I have ever done it until I had the necessity of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So for everyone, for everyone listening, is you don't have to wait until you need to. You can do it as a good practice and then start asking yourself those questions that only you have answers to.
Absolutely. Yeah, nobody else will prioritize your well-being. So you have to do it for yourself. Although that said, I mean, there's absolutely things organizations can do to support in this place, but it doesn't take the responsibility off of us for doing what we can as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. One last thing, because we have spoken about boundaries. And I know that's like, to me, I struggled putting boundaries for a long time. And then it wasn't only at work, like it was following me everywhere. So I was like boundaryless. So like a free, I don't know, a free run thing without any. And then I allowed a lot of things to come into my way. What are like some of those things that people can easily start with asking maybe themselves, or what is a good place to start when you want to set effective boundaries?
Yeah, great question. And maybe curious to hear what helped you, because it sounds like you have boundaries in place now. But I'll start with what has helped me and how I help others too. And I think it does start with getting, again, building up that self awareness for what those voices in your head are telling you that are getting in the way of you setting that boundary, right? So, again, for me, it was a lot of that. I need to keep people happy at all times. That's my job, right? And so, doing some of that reframing is pretty necessary before even going and having that conversation with somebody. And so that is the first step. And then it is, I think, I like the saying from Brene Brown, where clear is kind and unclear is unkind. It's really communicating it with few words, right? Just say what needs to be said, but you don't need to be over apologizing or kind of, going on and on so that your boundary actually gets lost in the words, just to soften it. You can communicate clearly and kindly, and it's actually reframing it as well in a way that this is not going to disappoint others or make others upset. It actually helps everybody, right? When that boundary is clear and they know where you stand, they know what you want, and then there's not that resentment or frustration or guilt or whatever that feeling is that comes out from being boundaryless, as he said, right? But I'm curious what helped you in that space.
I love when I am in a podcast and the guests ask me questions. Thank you. To me, it started with knowing who exactly I was and what was happening when I didn't have it. So, for example, I have a small kid and I want to be playing with him, but I need to finish that piece of work. So, what is my priority? And a lot of moms will be saying, go play with your kid, yes, but I need to give that deliverable. So, what is the boundary that I need to set there? Is saying, okay, I need to work 30 more minutes. I finish this. If I'm concentrated, I finish quicker and then we can go play. So setting that, but I needed to understand it first, because otherwise I will be sitting for 3 hours working on something. The child is upset. I get upset. I don't finish it. And then it's just a revolving circle. But it took me to understand that it wasn't making me any favor if I tried to be in all the places and I tried to be the best all those places or all those roles that I wanted to accomplish. So that was big for me, is understanding that if I dedicate this time to you right now, and I'm sure you have tons of things to do after this, and I have also to do many things, but I'm giving you my undistracted attention because this time will never happen again. That was the second thing that helped me a lot on how do I put boundaries. Okay, I'm with you, I'm with you. I'm with him, I'm with him. I'm playing, I'm playing. So that will help me set boundaries to myself as well. Because sometimes
Mhm.
we on it and it's not the world making us, is us not being truthful to ourselves. So those are two pieces that helped me out in my putting boundaries. And in my experience, it was much more difficult to put it with the people that I love, the closest to me, than at work, for example,
Mhm.
with clients. Or so it's when you have not that attachment. It was more, when I had the attachment, it was more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up that example because I really believe, as having two young kids as well, there's no better teacher for boundaries than kids, right? And when you're talking about how it doesn't kind of benefit you from not having those boundaries, it wasn't benefiting him either, right? And that's been kind of my learning journey with children as well. And then what you get from that, you're saying you get more presence, like you get to be more fully present with your kid when you have those boundaries. That's worth all of the exercise in of itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing, if I had to do it all the way again, is trying to listen to your intuition. Like if I would have listened to myself, probably I wouldn't be here because I am here because everything that has shaped me into who I am today. However, would have I not gone through some more struggles? Yeah, for sure, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. So if you're like in your 20s listening to this podcast, think of an age, you will be my age. So yeah, listen to your intuition because it's telling you something that is really good for you. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Megan, any time has flown really fast. I've told you this, like at the beginning I was very ambitious and then now I just want to keep talking and talking with the guests. But time has come down to almost an end. Why do you think it's important for people to be part of this material business community?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I have recently been introduced to the community, right? So you and I met through another amazing women leader in the industry who I admire so much and have
Thank
since
you,
listened.
Teresa.
Yes, so to Teresa. And since then have listened to your podcast and just have so much respect for the authenticity that you bring and the curiosity and the courage that it takes and that you bring to show up and share your story and then bring others' stories to the world and just bringing that different perspective, a different way of thinking to this space. I really think that's the leadership that we need right now, and you're helping to inspire others to show up in this way just by showing up here. So I think that in and of itself is an important reason to be tuning in.
Thank you, Megan, and everyone that is part of this community. Thank you very much. Everyone that shares with their friends and family episodes or the whole podcast channel. It really helps us, and we reach areas that we never thought it would reach. Like when I started this, I never thought someone in the other side of the world will be listening and then having an opportunity to get all those different ideas and get to know Megan, who's a fantastic person doing all that work. And then it's like sometimes it's like, wow. So thank you for that piece. Any last messages for the audience?
I would just say, yeah, it depends who's listening. If you're a leader in an organization that has the ability to impact change within the organization, just take a look at that leadership pipeline, identify your top female talent, those high potential, high performing women, and invest in their development. It'll pay off in spades in innovation, productivity, and culture. And then for the women that are listening as well, just don't wait for permission to take up space, right? Advocate for yourself, build up your community, and take that time to really think about where it is that you want to go in your career, the things that you stand for, and then take small actions every day to move you in that direction, because that's how we build the confidence and resilience through it all.
Thank you. I'll just add one thing. Don't forget that you're not alone because you have mentioned it several times in this discussion. Like sometimes, and I think when we first spoke, that was one of the things that we said to each other. Like it feels so good to speak with someone that gets you. It's like, oh yeah, I've been there and I've had that, and then I built this, and so sometimes it feels very lonely, and it doesn't have to. So reach out if you're in that position and you need to get a piece of advice or search for resources, get involved in community that gets the idea that you're wanting to develop and then helps you go where you want to be.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you in the podcast. I hope everyone just enjoyed this as much as I did. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Material Business Podcast. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.